What if I told you the secret to a happier life isn't about having more time, but how you spend the time you already have? Welcome back to the U Potential podcast, where we talk to interesting people about how to live meaningful lives. I'm your host, Sean Maslick. If you're enjoying these conversations, please hit the subscribe button so you get notified when the next episode is released. Today, I'm talking to Dr. Cassie Holmes, author of The Happier Hour and professor of happiness at UCLA. Her research explores many fascinating areas, including how focusing on time rather than money increases happiness, how our definition of happiness changes throughout our lives, and the joy we get from both extraordinary and ordinary experiences. In this conversation, we talk about how to spend your time to create a happier life, what happiness really means, and why it matters. We also touch on the surprising connection between money, happiness, and time, and we talk about this concept of time poverty and how it influences all of us. Dr. Holmes shares practical insights from her research that will help you spend your time on the things that truly matter for a life well lived. She blends evidence-based research with practical wisdom and personal experience to give us a roadmap for creating happier lives. I hope you enjoy this fascinating conversation. Professor Cassie Holmes, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Sean. I'm excited to chat.
I'm very excited to chat with you. I first came across a few of your papers years ago before your book, and ever since then I was really interested in your research. And when your book came out, I have to say it was time well spent, and I'm looking forward to our audience hearing some of these practical suggestions and just ways of being in life on how we can have more happier hours, because it's critically important to live in a good life. So welcome.
Thank you. It is so important. And I hope that this little time that we have together for your listeners is also time well spent.
I think it's going to be. So I've seen online that you call yourself a happiness professor.
Mm-hmm.
I want to start here. It's a word that we throw out all the time, happiness. And many of us have our own definitions, our own experiences around happiness. As someone who has dedicated their life to studying happiness, how do you define happiness?
Yeah, and when I use the term, and I love that you asked that, because people do have their own sort of definitions and associations, and some people are like, happiness, that's so silly and fleeting and indulgent and selfish. Like, what a silly term. Why would anyone dedicate not only their career to studying it, but be sort of suggesting that other people should be making choices that prioritize it? So I'm very glad you asked. And when I am using the term happiness, I am referring to what we refer to in the sort of academic literature as subjective well-being. So that includes both how we experience our hours as well as our days, and sort of how we're feeling during the time that we're spending, but also how we feel about the time that we're spending, how satisfied we feel about our days, about our years, about our life overall. So there is both, when I'm using the term happiness, I am conflating the two, that emotional well-being as well as that sort of cognitive appraisal of our lives as being positive, really, and satisfying. And the literature sometimes sort of pulls them apart, that emotional well-being and satisfaction with life. In my work, I am really sort of pulling those together, and what are those ways of spending time. The good stuff are those that you both experience positively, but also you feel really positive about. And then there's the term meaning, which is, it's its own construct, absolutely. But it is so closely associated with that satisfaction, that cognitive component. And so when I'm talking about happiness, I am not saying that like be happy, like forget about meaning, forget about these other rewarding things. What I'm talking about is making decisions that you can both feel good in and feel good about the lives that we live.
I like that the distinction of feeling good in and about. As you're talking, it makes me think of the rock and roll stars, as they probably feel really good in their lives, but then you hear sometimes they have alcohol and drug issues, and not just rock and roll stars, but I'm just assuming that, in the moment there's that hedonic, like really good experiences, but we hear often there's depression that comes with it, the fame, etc. So would that be an example of maybe we're feeling good in it, but maybe not necessarily about it? And maybe just touch on why those two key ingredients are important.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you could also like taking that rock and roll star sort of analogy. It's like, yes, there might be those sort of years where it's like super fun and they're, sort of living the high without feeling like maybe not remembering the high or it taking a toll on their well-being in the moment and perhaps afterwards. But then you could also imagine that that rock and roll star is like, absolutely, they are in the moment, but also like this is their calling. They are bringing their
Mm-hmm.
music and voice to a broader audience. So there's that sense of fulfillment from that. But the thing I think it's important to sort of recognize both aspects of it, because when we're making the decisions about how we spend our time, um, I'm sort of like the things that are the best are those that really solve both, right? It's like they are both they feel really good even as you're coming out of it because it has that rewarding quality, but also you feel really good about how it sort of influences and plays out in your evaluation of your life overall. And so I think it's helpful to sort of highlight that that cognitive component, that satisfaction is also what I'm talking about when I'm talking about happiness, because it isn't just this fleeting passing thing that has no substance in
Mm-hmm.
terms of our evaluations of the lives that we're living.
Yeah. How, what are some ways that help people exercise that muscle of the cognitive approach so that they have the time and space to have this opportunity to have appraisal in their lives? Because there are times, and you study a lot about this, as how busy we are. And I don't know, we always think we should sit back and like cognitively appraise how well our life is or how meaningful our life is.
Or even like how we feel about our life, right? Like
Yeah.
even how happy it is. Sometimes and oftentimes we are just reacting. And uh, in my work, so with my focus, particularly, not only do I study happiness, but my particular focus is on the role of time. How should we be thinking about and spending our time? Um, and that the fact that so often we are not thinking about
Mm-hmm.
even how we're spending our time. We are just reacting to the demands that are coming in, the perhaps these sort of like nebulous notions of expectations, whether we put them on ourselves, whether we feel like society or partners are putting them on us. But we tend to be very reactive and not intentional. And the really it's like it's so silly. That's what I ultimately am sort of based off of the research suggesting that people do. It is literally just becoming
Mm-hmm.
intentional about what you spend your time on, as well as when you're spending that time paying attention. So it is such a simple thing, but the reason that it is so powerful is because, to your question, we don't do it naturally, or we don't tend towards it because we are reacting, because we live in this very fast-paced culture, society where we feel time poor. And we can talk about time poverty as its own construct because I've been very interested in that, both because it's something that has been a big barrier for my own happiness, as well as because it is prevalent. And a lot of the audiences that I speak to, my MBA students, undergrads, working parents, professionals, like in our data, in a nationally representative sample of the US, we find that nearly half of Americans feel time poor, which is that acute feeling of having too much to do, not enough time to do it. And a half, to the audiences I speak to, I'm like, raise your hand if you feel like you don't have enough time to get everything done. And like everybody in
Mm.
the room pretty much raises their hand. And then it's like, how could it only be that half of Americans feel this way? But notably, that half includes retirees. It includes folks who are not sort of employed, and perhaps not due to their own choices. So you get a lot of individuals for whom they actually fall into the, not only are they not time poor, but in some folks are actually sort of feel like they have too much time, and that sense of wandering. And so all to say, with time poverty, what happens is that it makes us just react. We are moving through our days. And I open my book sharing exactly this experience when I was earlier in my career, had a new baby. I was an assistant professor, tenure track, so I was working my butt off. And I also had a partner and these friends and the never-ending pile of chores. And it was this recognition when I was sitting on the train late at night, totally exhausted, where I had that one moment to reflect. Again, to your question of like, how often do we actually sit and think about,
Mhm.
what is my life and how am I doing right now? In that moment, I was absolutely reflecting, and I was like, this is bad. Because for me, I recognized that I was just moving through my days. It was all a blur. And I was not intentional around how I was spending my time, nor could I pay any attention during that time. And I had this big fear that not only was the fear was forward looking, my current experience was exhaustion and like dissatisfaction. And my fear was that I would look back on my years and it would all be this. It would all be this blur where I was moving through my days and my years, just reacting. So that is an experience that many people have. And so, in like, I was like, should I quit my job? I decided not to quit my job, and instead redirected my research to figure out how should we be spending our time? How should we be thinking about our time so that not only do we feel good in our lives, but we also feel good about our lives, and
Mhm.
at the end, we don't look back with regret. And the answer to that is just intentionality. It is about thinking of taking that broader perspective of time, which I would love to talk more about, which makes us become more intentional, less reactive, and more proactive.
Thank you for that story. And yeah, I want to touch on this broader perspective of time.
Mm-hmm.
First, I'm curious here. So you were studying happiness for many, many years, and then it sounds like you started focusing on how to spend time and the construct of time poverty.
It was actually the other way around, but
Oh, it was the other way around. Okay.
yeah.
Uh, where my mind was going is you're sitting on this
Yeah.
train. How it seems like the parent in you really had that reflective moment. How much, if any at all, has your having these little creatures that we're trying to raise impacted, I guess, the depth of this research for you?
Well, ton, right? It totally affected a ton, in one way because even before that night on the train when I had my new baby, I was absolutely time poor. Like I was, working my butt off. I still had the demands of work, wanting to be a good partner, wanting to be a good friend, the never-ending pile of chores. I didn't have a baby yet, but then all of a sudden, once I had my baby, it was like, oh my gosh, this is so important. Like any
Mm-hmm.
time spent away from um, this little bundle that I love so much, as well as the responsibility that that little bundle sort of, I felt like, put on me. It increased the cost, and therefore made it I felt like even more time poor, like this, how can one actually manage all of this? But it also made it much more, it forced me to be intentional because I'm like, this matters, right? Um, it makes time all the more salient. So when I was saying the sort of the trajectory of my career, it didn't start with happiness and then look at time. It actually, I was looking at time first, and I was looking at what's the role of focusing on time as our most critical resource versus money. And as a PhD, marketing PhD at a business school, initially I was looking at what's the effect of that on the choices people make of their sort of consumer products and their satisfaction with those consumption decisions. But then I was like, well, I don't just care about the satisfaction one has with a magazine they buy or a cup of coffee. I care about how people's happiness with their perspective on like bigger questions, like how they're spending their time and their happiness. And so it led me to focus on happiness as an outcome that was important. And when I say happiness, again, that sort of
Mm-hmm.
satisfaction in and about our lives. And then, but I had always been interested in time. What's the role of thinking about time more broadly? Because people tend not to do that. And then thinking, and then my research was looking at like, oh, what are these other sort of constructs of time? Like how much time do we have left in our life? And I found that age and relatedly, people's perspective of how limited their time is influences um, the way they spend their time and their happiness with how they spend their time. So it's almost like this role of salience of time in general had these effects. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, but time is this, like having my first baby made me realize just even more so. It's like dialing it up. It's like, it's not just that time is our most critical resource, but it is so critical because those hours away from our kids, but also it really highlights seeing in their lifetime, like how much changes in when they're babies, like days and then months and then now years, where it absolutely highlights the role of time, not just in terms of hours of the day where time poverty exists, but also it highlights the role of the years that comprise our lives. And so time is passing quickly, and that's all the more salient with the little ones. And I am, and as before, we started recording today, we were talking about the ages of our kids, and really the phases that they go through at a much faster clip than us in our adult lives, again highlights the importance of time, paying attention to it, how we spend it, as well as making sure that our lives, how we show up in our lives and the legacy we leave, um, is worthwhile.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate the depth of the answer, and I could tell just how much energy and time you spent really becoming the expert in this field. An interesting part when you talk about the construct of time poverty in the book, where you tell a story about, I believe, Leo,
Leo,
trying
yeah, it's my first baby.
your first baby and trying to get to, I don't know if it was daycare or school, and you were saying, come on, hurry up, hurry up, hurry up. And it struck you because he was actually smelling the roses at that moment in time. I bring this up because when I read that, I really started trying to pay more attention to my kids. And you keep talking about how this is about paying attention. And it is amazing as I try to like psychologically deconstruct this rushedness I feel. And I felt it was really refreshing in your chapter when you talked about how a lot of this could be a subjective experience, feeling time poverty. And I started slowing down with my kids. When I say started, I do it now and then, and it keeps
I
coming
know.
back in my head.
You
Yeah,
have to catch yours. I catch myself too.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so my question is how much of this, if any and all at all, maybe I'm getting it wrong, is subjective. It's like we think that we have this time poverty. And, if we look at our calendars, we might very well, but at least for myself, I felt a lot of value in looking at it from this subjective lens.
Yeah, and there's a lot of subjectivity to it. And actually, the our definition of time poverty is the acute feeling of having too much to do and not enough time to do it. So it is absolutely subjective. And actually, we just are working on a paper right now, which is highlighting how important it is to recognize the subjectivity of it and to measure that, of asking people how time pressure, how time poor they feel, because historically, it sort of academics would just assess time poverty by looking at, how much time are you spending in a day on various obligations? Initially, it was work hours. And then they're like, the smart people are like, it's not just paid work that are these demands that take away our available time. It's also unpaid housework, unpaid childcare. But then there's also these demands of, personal care. You do need to shower in order to show up in the world and not be stinky, right? So, but even if you were to sort of accurately calculate how much time someone was spending on their obligations and how much time was left available, that still doesn't capture how time pressured people feel that they are, because there might be these other demands that they have in their heads of like, oh my gosh, there's all these other things that I have to do, even if they don't show up in your calendar. There's also that rushedness, right? That sense of hurry, that even if the meeting starts at the same time, if you're fully thinking about that meeting, like on my walk with my son, then I am just rushed and hurried, and I feel like there's not enough time. And it doesn't even take time. Like in that chapter, I actually I named the chapter "Pause and Smell the Roses," not even "Stop and Smell the Roses." Like him, and I still remember this day, and he still has the great smile. Now he's 12 and not 3, which he was at the time. But he was like skipping along and just smelling the rose. For me to what like drew the attention to me was when I'm like yelling at him, we don't have time to stop and smell the roses. But it's like literally, if I took a second, it's not even a long time. We didn't have to like sit and have a picnic in front of the roses to have the effect. It literally is like slowing down, to your point, even mentally, just noticing the roses, and like smelling as you're walking by. You don't need to take more time in order to feel that sense of relief from this like propulsion that we have through our lives. So there is a lot of subjectivity to it. And the nice thing about that is, like, what I don't want people to take away, the fact that time poverty is subjective, is like, oh, then it's your fault that you feel time poor, because no, it's not your fault. There's a lot of these other pressures and demands that sort of propel us to feel that way. But what is nice about it is that it does highlight that we have a little bit more control than we might think. in terms of our experience, the way that we experience time. And it doesn't require having a whole lot more time or taking a whole lot more time. In many cases, it is about the paying attention during the right times,
Mhm.
and that you can have these really powerful effects.
It's so amazing. Like my daughter the other day wanted to show me a picture, and I can't remember what I was doing, but I was feeling busy and hurried. And my initial reaction was, okay, yeah, let's go, let's go, let's go. And I think 15 seconds, I was like, oh wow, that's a beautiful picture. And like, I just felt this connection between her and I. And I walked away after thinking, like, wow, the amount she could have felt dismissed by her dad by me just being like, hey, yeah, 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 like super excited to show me this. And like, it could have just been a normal event. Like, you're just busy. I could justify it in my head as like, we don't have time to look at this. We got to get to school, etc. But whether it's our children or others, and in the book, you talk a lot about social connections are one of the most impactful ways to spend our time. Giving someone a little bit of our time, I think, is a rewarding way to spend those moments.
Absolutely. And I have research to sort of make that exact point, that giving time can actually, in some cases, make us feel like we have more time. And so, and we showed this in having people, when we feel rushed and time poor, we are we don't give our time, right? It's like, I'm like rushing. I don't have 5 minutes. I don't have 15 seconds to look at your picture. And there is the research that shows that when we feel like we're pressed for time, that we're less likely to slow down and help others out. In our work, we found that actually when people did give some of their time to help someone else, and we showed this in like spending 30 minutes on a Saturday doing something for someone else versus for themselves. We saw it in 15 minutes at the end of a study that were like, actually, hold on, study participant, can you help a high schooler edit their essay versus leave? And then you would have that 15 minutes to yourself. We saw in these giving time conditions that actually it made people feel like they had more time. They increased their sense of time affluence, which is the face of it sort of counterintuitive. How could spending 15 seconds, actually stopping to look at your daughter's picture, or how could spending 15 minutes or 30 minutes for someone else actually make you feel like you have more time? And the mechanism is that when we do spend the time in these ways to help someone, or in this meaningful way, it's like, oh, that was worthwhile. I accomplished something in that time. And that sense of self-efficacy then translates into like, oh, actually, I can accomplish a lot with my time more generally. And it lessens this sense of constraint. So it's almost like it's like lifting like off this pressure, this sort of like continual pressure of constantly being like, I don't have the time. And actually, if you do it and you spend it well, then it increases your sense of time affluence. I will also say that there's caveats. Like, if all of your time is taken from you and it's not you giving it,
Hmm.
or you are spending so much that you aren't actually able to accomplish your own um, demands or tasks, then it can have, like, it's not going to have this effect. But there's a lot of space in our days, in our lives, where actually, if we stop the reacting and sort of are very intentional, spend your time in those seconds um, in a connecting, giving, sort of fulfilling way, then it makes us recognize it's like, okay, I actually have more time than I think. Um, and again, it's about being proactive rather than reactive. And also, and I share this, I've shared this in talks that I've given of this example. You asked about the role of my kids, and you mentioned this before, because it's something that is, it's very, um, it continues to be very impactful for me are my weekly coffee dates with my daughter Lita. And so we started this when she was 4, actually going to preschool, and I would on Thursday mornings after dropping off big brother Leo on the way to taking her to preschool, next to my office, I would stop and get coffee. And something that is so just routine and practical because I need caffeine, right? Turned into this like beautiful treasured ritual that we have together. And it's 30 minutes where it's the two of us and it's just the two of us chatting. I'm not having her drink coffee. She has hot chocolate. But it's this 30 minutes that is the two of us just together. And we have continued to do this. And having counted how many times we have left likely to have these weekly coffee dates, it made me recognize that, when she turns 12, now she's 9, when she turns 12, as we were talking about, she's going to want to go to the coffee shop with her friends instead of me. And then she's going to go off to college and then she's going to live across the country, right? And so I calculated that we have about 36% of our coffee dates left, which is significantly less than half. And she's only 9 years old. And the power of recognizing that, the counting times left, what that does is it highlights the role of time. Again, to one of your earlier questions of like, what's the role of these kids and our perspective of time? Well, it shows us how limited the time that we have, the meaningful time that we have with these people whom we love, and spending it in the time in the ways that we love are. They're limited, and therefore it makes them more precious. But what it also does is it makes us more intentional. So even in my busy weeks, I make the time. So I am proactive rather than reactive, right? But even I think more powerfully is when we're spending that time, I'm paying attention. Because I know I can't be sort of thinking about what's next and rushing through it because that's the time that matters, right? And it's 30 minutes. But, when you ask me what is happiness, it's how we feel in our lives and about our lives. If I'm like, okay, how happy am I about my life right now? Like, I will like that 30 minutes that happens each week has a big effect on my satisfaction with my life overall. Why? Because it's the relationship, the connection I have with my daughter. And it's only 30 minutes. Yes, I spend time with her outside of those 30 minutes each week. Don't worry. I'm not a totally terrible parent, but those 30 minutes are very powerful. And so I think what that highlights is that when it actually highlights exactly the question that you asked, how subjective not only is the amount of time we have available, but how subjective is the impact of the time that we spend on how our lives are. And it doesn't take a lot of time to have a really big impact if we pay attention and we're intentional.
Towards the beginning, you talked about finding activities that solve both, like the in the moment happiness and the appraisal or the reflective part. It definitely sounds like these coffee dates are solving both.
Mm-hmm.
I can't help but imagine, I know you did work around money and time. If you had to calculate the cost of not doing those coffee dates, I would imagine it would be a large number that you could even quantify. Yet there's so many of us who might not have done those coffee dates, to because we had to, whether it's money or something else that we had to pursue. But I know you can't answer this question like with a finite term, but can you imagine now if you had to like buy back those memories? I'm assuming the number would be very large.
Yeah. And you can't, right?
You can't.
I mean,
It's
they
gone.
are priceless. As cheesy as the MasterCard commercials were that I love so much. But the term is correct. They are priceless because there's
Yeah.
no amount of money that could actually buy back those moments or even that sort of resulting relationship that I have. And so it is absolutely worth the cost. And yes, like here in West LA, the price of hot chocolate is ridiculous. But even if I added up those like $5, oh my God, I'm even embarrassing it each week, that I spent on those hot chocolates, like that's, and then, one needs to think about what their sort of wallets can manage, but the missing out on those, to your point, is
Mm-hmm.
priceless. But then there's also the work that shows like that truly investing in experiences does have a sort of more lasting and impactful effect on our happiness and satisfaction than had I spent, say I didn't spend the money on the coffee dates and I had a terrible relationship with my daughter. And then with my guilt, I was buying her things to feel better about it. And the research shows that investing in the material things doesn't have the same positive effect, not only on our happiness, but the connecting happiness. So whether it is investing in a cup of coffee or hot chocolate, or on the vacation, which requires both time and money of getting away. But it's really, you don't need the financial investment to have the effect of these times
Mm-hmm.
on our satisfaction in and about our lives.
As I was thinking about that question, the MasterCard slogan was what prompted it. And I didn't know if you would get the reference. I didn't know if they had those down in the US, just in Canada, but I held on to that one. But I find it interesting you brought it up. Yeah, it just really sounds like, regardless of the $5 hot chocolate, it's that time. And you've been using the word intentional and presence a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a big lesson, even for me in reading your book and this conversation, is really being present. I'm curious, and I'm also putting a pin in. I want to go back to these experiences, but going back to the being present, I know there's a lot of research on happiness, on like if we try to be happy, the counter happens,
Yeah.
we become unhappy. I'm wondering, have you seen people who try to be intentional about their time? Like we're trying to implement this and we're hyper focused on making sure that we're doing all these activities, but all of a sudden we're not present like we're going through the right motions, but we're not present. How do we combat against trying to be hyper focused with our time?
Yeah. And it's a good question because yes, when you're like so focused on pursuing happiness, it can have a backlash effect because you're like at every moment, like, am I happy now? Am I happy now? And like many times you are not happy right now. And that is going to make you feel bad. Similarly with time, if like it is so much about optimizing every moment, then it is, and I am subject to this. This is why I'm like laughing at myself, because then it's like when I'm waiting in line somewhere, it drives me berserkle because I'm like, oh my God, this is a waste of time. I'm very sensitive to things that are a waste of time. And actually, we're starting to do research now of like, what activities do people experience as a waste of time? But it does make you very, um, you have to be aware not to be like put so much pressure on every moment to be so meaningful and worthwhile. And the way that I would actually sort of respond to counter that tendency is actually sort of in my book, I talk a lot about the research, the role of presence and the role of like identifying what activities are worthwhile and all these sort of strategies. But then ultimately it's leading to how do we construct an ideal week, even like forget about like taking your years, in your life overall, but like just thinking about the week, because and taking that perspective is helpful because it's not like every minute in the week is going to be perfect. It's not like
Mm-hmm.
every activity is going to be super worthwhile. There are chores that we do have to do. There are going to be times that you do have to wait in line. There are aspects of our work hours that aren't all that productive feeling. There are times that we're socializing that aren't fun. There are times with our kids that aren't actually fun, right? It's like getting this stuff done. And so what I think is helpful is to, instead of thinking about like, how do you optimize every minute, but taking the sort of broader perspective of time, thinking about your week overall. Okay, how do I, having figured out what are those activities that are so crucial to your well-being, your satisfaction, your connection. So like my coffee date, for instance, making sure that despite my feeling very busy and reacting, I like make sure that I put it into the schedule so that it will have some time there. For exercise, that's something also that when we feel time poor, we are very quick to neglect. But there's so much work and research, as well as when we do exercise, we see the impact on how not only we feel like right after it, but how we feel overall. There is the work, like, and we haven't even talked about work, and that could be like a whole nother segment about like what are those work hours that are worthwhile, that are aligned with our purpose, that are in line with the goals of our organization, versus the work hour or like the work activities that just sort of fill time, right? Um, and then there's going to be those chores that we have to do. So it's really about, and what I find is so valuable in this, what I call time crafting, is like, how do you protect time for the things that matter? How do you piece your activities together so that you increase the impact of the good stuff? You decrease the impact of the bad stuff. And it's not about every moment being perfect, but it is about when you're looking at your life as overall, your week overall, how do you feel about it? Having spent those moments in it, like the coffee date, like the really fun parts of work that, if I don't protect time for, don't happen. So that it's not about, again, it's not about optimizing the minute. It is about optimizing our time overall and how it all pieces together like the mosaic of our life, right? It's all of those tiles and how they sort of show up in consort that influences how we feel about our lives and will influence how we feel looking back on our lives.
Mm. Yeah, that how we look back on our lives, that really resonates with me right now. And in the section of your book where you talked about time crafting, I believe it was in the time crafting section, where you talk about zooming out and looking at our lives from a perspective, is making me or your answers make me think about that, looking at the week as opposed to the individual scheduled hour or minute by minute.
Yeah.
And it really seems like that, that really resonates with me, that in the end of a week, because, a month might be too long. I might not have intentionally focused on those coffee dates, so to speak, where a week seems like a proper amount of time. So maybe can you just touch more on what you have found about zooming out from that mosaic that you explained, and how that can help us actually do the work that you're saying? Because there's one,
Yeah.
there's a thing to know this stuff, but actually doing that work to say what you just said, looking back and saying like, I'm enjoying this. This was a good week.
Yeah.
So what have you seen that helps people do the work that you're talking about?
Yeah. So there's like both avenues into it. One is sort of looking at the activities that we've done. So I talk about time tracking. So over the course of a week, tracking how you spent your time and rating as you come out of those activities or those hours, how do you feel? Which is illuminating in terms of like, oh, what are those activities that actually are sources of satisfaction? Instead of relying on averages coming out of the general time tracking research, or even our sort of poor predictions of the activities that bring us joy. And then I have other exercises that allow people to sort of figure out like, oh, within their days, what are those sources of satisfaction and joy? But so you can go in that way. But the part that I actually have been thinking is even more useful is starting from this broader perspective of thinking about our years overall, like what ultimately matters. Say you take the perspective of, the end of your life, looking back, how do you want to be remembered? What will be important? Um, and we also have data where we measure the extent to which people take a broad perspective of their time, thinking about the years of their life overall versus a more narrow perspective of their time, which is thinking like activity or hour by hour. And what we find is that people who tend to take a broader perspective of time report being more satisfied in their lives, having a greater sense of meaning in their lives. They also report feeling less stress during their days and more enjoyment during their days. One of the reasons that seems to be coming out from our data is that when people are thinking about the broader perspective of time in the years of their life, they tend to protect time and spend time on things that are important to them rather than just reacting to activities that are presented as urgent. So it's that importance that of recognizing what really does matter, so that what does matter to you as an individual can then sort of pull through to influence, like, oh, how do I actually schedule my week? Right?
Mm.
So it's like, what matters to me is my relationship with my kids. How does that influence how I spend my hours? And then looking at my schedule, it's like, oh, the coffee date, make sure it's in there. It
Mhm.
also makes sure that in our evenings when we are home after the school day, after the work day, that those 2 hours before they go to bed, phones are away. It's like, we call it no phone zone. So that is intentional present time. But of course, it's not like all of my time my phone is away. No, I have to react, during the workday as I'm commuting. I am like on my phone reacting to things. And so all to say, it's the values that are influencing those particularly important things to show up in our days. And also what taking that broader perspective uh, does for us is it allows us it doesn't force trade-offs, that at any moment, like, it's not forcing you to say, what is your most important thing in life, right? If you're at work, then that would suggest, oh, your kids are not important to you. Or if you're picking up your
Mhm.
kids, you're like, oh, that would enforce the fact that work is not important to you. It's not a question, when you take this broader perspective of thinking of your week overall, it's not a question of if you're spending your time in a particular way, it's a question of when. And so then with the when and the tiles, it's like, okay, these are the tiles, taking the mosaic analogy, these are the tiles where I'm really investing in my kids. These are the tiles where I'm really investing in my work. And I can see that both of those fit, you know?
Mhm.
It's whereas if actually this is sort of touching back to your question before, if someone is so hyper focused on optimizing their time that they're like every moment has to be perfect, even that forces these trade-offs. But we have lots of priorities. We have lots of things that matter to us. And taking the broader view of time allows us to live out all of those priorities, all of those things that matter to us. Um, and again, it doesn't take a whole lot of time to invest in any one of those for it to have an impact on our satisfaction in life. But this broader perspective, or taking this view of your week even, allows you to put those priorities in there, dedicate the time to those. And when you're spending it, you're like, you don't feel like, when I'm with my kids, I don't feel like my career is lost, because I am very clear, like, oh, there's other hours in my week where my career is my focus, and vice versa. Or like even my husband, he's in there too. And it's not just like this background that he happens to be like present in some stuff. It's like, there are times where I'm like, we are each other's focus. And that is so important too. And my friends, it's like there are times they're there, and my, um, exercise, like taking care of myself, there's times in there, and it is not a trade off. When I am out on a run by myself, it is not me neglecting or like not caring about the rest of these priorities, like my kids and my work. It is yet another thing that's important to me, and that it can absolutely show up in the time that I spend when I take that broader perspective.
It really sounds like that broader perspective allows you to, as you've been saying, be intentional, but also present in those
Mhm,
moments, because you know that whether it's time with your husband or work, that will come. You don't have to feel stressed that like, I'm choosing this over the other.
mhm.
I really like that idea of zooming out. People might be listening, be like, I need more time. I need more time. You hear that often, like all these good things about time. And they might be wondering, where am I going to find this time? I found it very interesting when you talked about your research findings on the I don't know if the word is minimum, but the least amount of hours that allows us to have these feelings of not feeling time poverty. But also I found it interesting and agreed with could be a ceiling, or there could be a number that allows you too much time. Can you
Yeah.
talk about what you found?
Yeah. And I think it's so important to highlight because for those of us who feel extremely time poor, like the answer is, especially in those like really sort of pressing moments, like that night on the train that I've already sort of referenced, um, where it's like, oh my gosh, I have not enough time. The answer is I have to quit everything. If only I like didn't have a job, then then I would have all the time. And then with this expectation, like with more time, I would be happier. And then is that true? So we examined what is the relationship between the amount of discretionary time people have and their happiness. And this is work with Hal Hirschfield and Marissa Sharif, where we examined this question. And our approach to looking at this, some of our studies was looking at time use data. So we could look at among the American Time Use Survey. So it captures how tens of thousands of working and non-working Americans spend a regular day. And they also have a reported life satisfaction. So we could calculate how much time did they spend on discretionary activities, and with the sort of implication that the remaining time is available time. Um, and what we found was that it was a negative quadratic relationship. So it's a upside down U shape, like an arc or a rainbow, in terms of what is the relationship between the amount of discretionary time or available time people have and their happiness. And this is really interesting because it shows that actually happiness goes down on both ends of the spectrum. So those with too little time, the time use data set, or in the data, it looked like those with less than approximately 2 hours of discretionary time in the day were less happy. Those were the time poor people, right? And that
Mhm.
unhappiness is really picking up on the high levels of stress. What was super interesting, it wasn't just that it leveled off, but actually happiness went down when in this data set among those with more than approximately 5 hours of discretionary time in the day. Happiness went down. This is interesting, right? Because it's like in those moments where like, oh my God, I have to quit everything and like don't have enough time, more time would be better. That it's not just that more time wouldn't be better. It's like it could actually, there's such thing as too much time. And the reason for that is because um, when people are spending so much time in their days with nothing to show for it, it undermines their sense of purpose.
Mhm.
So it's that sort of the too much time effect is because it makes people feel like they're sort of not at all productive or don't have purpose. And this is actually, I think, really important because it cautions us away from this idea that if only I like quit everything and lived on the beach and I'd be happy. The answer is no. It also cautions us away from that sort of hurrying towards an early retirement that I
Mm-hmm.
sort of hear a lot about from my MBAs. They're like, oh, if only I make a lot of money, then like when I'm 35, I can retire. And then I'm like, and then what are you going to do with your time? You know? And so that too much time effect. So it cautions us. It also is a um, for recent retirees of trying to figure out like how do they actually fill some of the hours of their days in something that feels productive or worthwhile, so as not to get that dissatisfaction from a lacking sense of purpose. I will also say, though, in our data, we see that the particular ways people spend their discretionary time in among those with a lot of discretionary time, it does have an effect. So when those with more than 5 hours of discretionary time in the day are just spending it relaxing, watching TV, these sort of individual, it is actually passive leisure, then you see this negative effect. However, when people spend their discretionary time in either socially connecting ways or ways that they feel are worthwhile and productive, and in our data, sort of things that popped up here were like pursuing a hobby where you're learning something and sort of growing and building, or doing something that is like volunteer work for the betterment of others, you didn't see the too much time effect. So again, this is going to, I think, a very interesting point where we're talking about time and happiness or satisfaction or even meaning, that it's not about how much time you have available or how much time you spend on any given activity. It is absolutely about sort of, again, being intentional, protecting time for those activities that do matter, some in your day. It's not like all days are going to be perfect at every moment. We've already talked about that. But it's also when spending on those particular activities is paying attention. So it's not about quantity of time. It's absolutely about the quality of the time.
Yeah, that quality of time seems to be the quality of many things, quality of what we spend our money on, even the quality of how we spend our times really, really matters. And this through line that I keep hearing is intention and presence, I think helps us zoom out, see that mosaic of life, and then allow us to be intentional to deepen, I guess, the richness of our time spent. I on this podcast, I interviewed a musician. His name's Hoxley Workman. I really, really like him. He has a quote from one of his songs that popped into my mind by what you were saying. But it's you can make a lot of money, but you can never make time. And as you were talking, that came into my head, and I think it is so true. On that quote, what have you learned the role money plays in how we spend our time? And it's your first paper that you mentioned, Hal Hirschfeld. That paper about people who choose time over money are happier. That's where I first found your work. And I know I don't know. I assume your thinking has evolved since then. But what, based on our conversation, what role does money play in this conversation?
Yeah. Well, going back to the early work, it is as simple as shifting focus in terms of that critical resource from money, which tends to absorb within our culture people's attention, and drives their decision making, and instead shifting to recognize time as our most critical resource, even sort of picking up on that quote, to highlight how important our time is and how personally and existentially important our time is compared to money. But I actually sort of period there, like focusing on time versus money as your most critical resource. But there's also interesting questions around like, okay, like a lot of the things that I'm talking about are about intentionality with time and being able to acquire spend our time in ways to acquire experiences that play out into, greater satisfaction. Um, and money can give access to some of these experiences, but it doesn't have to. Also with respect to money, and I'm sure you have other guests who have talked about overall the relationship between happiness and money. If it's a question of not having enough money to meet your basic needs, then that's absolutely a source of stress. I mean, I've been
Mm-hmm.
focusing on time pressure and time poverty, but if you are actually in a state of financial poverty where it is a question of getting food on the table, a safe place to live, um, yes, time is important, but so
Mm-hmm.
is money. It's when we're sort of in this realm of being able to meet your basic needs, with the financial means that you have, then time comes into play more of this, having discretion on where we dedicate our time. Um, and, there is work. Ashley Willens and her colleagues have found that outsourcing, um, or spending money on time-saving services, leads to greater happiness if you then reallocate that saved time towards meaningful activities. So you can see that there's a role of money there, right? There's the work on investing in experiences versus things. So if you're more thoughtful about how you spend your money on, and I will point out that experiences involve time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Spending time in particular ways that are connecting and that you have these memories, that you can carry with you. So all to say that, um, money is important for meeting basic needs, and money can be thoughtfully, intentionally spent to improve the time that you have, and can have a positive effect there. Um, but ultimately, um, in my view, how we spend the hours of our days sum up to the years of our lives. And so time is so critical. Money is a means to an end in terms of our life, but time is both the means and the end.
Mm. This is really making me think of there's all this conversation about how much money one needs to be happy. And there's a famous $75,000 study, which has been challenged, and the number keeps going up and up. And
Inflation.
inflation. And I believe you've done work with Jordy Quadback
Mm-hmm.
research. He was on, and he was talking about how even some latest research, he's not sure about this idea of there is potentially no cap on our experience levels of happiness and money when we have a higher propensity to be happier individuals in life. So there's so many different variations of it. From what I'm hearing you say is money does help, but ultimately it's how we're spending our moments that really matter.
Yeah. Absolutely. And even that last bit, of picking up that research that shows the happiest people, more money helps. And they don't have the data to support this, but I have a strong expectation that those happiest people are spending, if it is a question of the money they have available, they're spending their money in order to spend their time. That
Mm-hmm.
it is the intentionality of the happiest people, they are spending their time in ways that are connecting, that are fulfilling. And to the extent that money, sort of paves that way, um, great. But I suspect it's not the money per se, but it's the happiest people that are really intentional with their spending of time, more than anything else.
I really appreciate that answer, because I feel like since some of this research has been out, it's no, money does make you happier. And it seems to me, if I look at many of the tenets of a life well lived, we're getting outside in nature, spending it with connected relationships, meaningful conversations, doing work that you derive some sense of meaning. You don't need, money, to your point, does help, but it doesn't disqualify you from these activities if you don't have it.
Absolutely. And like even going to in my work, we were looking at the happiness from ordinary versus extraordinary experiences. So
When I
the
said I want to put a pin earlier
oh,
about experiences, that was this. So thank you.
oh, great. So I'm
Yeah.
glad we're looping back to it because I think it's such an important point, and it does relate to this too. Is we were exploring, is it the ordinary experiences like those simple shared moments with a loved one, like noticing the sunset, enjoying a treat, like whether it's that, cup of hot chocolate or coffee, um, or is it those extraordinary experiences that are expensive, like those once in a lifetime vacations, those like incredible concert tickets, or life milestones, like getting married, having like weddings, also a source of great expense. But our question was, is it the ordinary or extraordinary experiences that lead to greater happiness? And what we found is that age mattered in answering this. Younger people, they tended to experience greater happiness from extraordinary experiences than ordinary experiences. But older people, they experienced as much happiness from the ordinary experiences as the extraordinary experiences. Now, that at first, then one might walk away and be like, well, I'm a young person. So, like, and also in our data set, it was like a continuous effect. We happened to the median split was like under 35 and over 35, but that's not like, that's not like determines whether you're young or old. What I think this, and then in additional studies, we actually found that it's not about age, really. It's about how much time people feel like they have left in their life. So there's some young people who are very aware that the time in our lives is finite. There are some older people that think they're going to live forever. But what we found was that when people recognize that their time in life is limited, that their futures are limited, those are the ones that tend to experience as much happiness from these ordinary moments as the extraordinary moments. And what I think is really profound and powerful here is that it highlights that and the reason for that is because when we recognize our time is limited, it makes us recognize the preciousness of those times. This is exactly the counting the times left with my coffee dates with my daughter makes me pay attention during those dates, not just making the time for them. But when I'm in it, I'm like, oh my gosh, there's only so few left. And I like soak it up. I am savoring it. I'm absolutely like that ordinary experience is all of a sudden extraordinary, right? And what it highlights is that there's so much happiness available to all of us if we recognize the preciousness of our time, right? And that happiness doesn't have to be costly. These ordinary experiences are available, not only available in terms of how frequently they show up in our everyday lives, but they're available because they don't cost a lot. And it shows that there's so much extraordinary happiness available to all of us if we, going back to our theme for today, pay attention, are intentional, and really it's about recognizing the preciousness of our time so that we make the most of our time.
Make the most of our time. That's when you think of the, I guess as the Stoics say, the finite lens of life, making the most of your time is perhaps a life's journey to living that good life. When you said so much happiness available around us, I even look back as you're talking about the younger people might say the extraordinary trips or experiences were better. When I look back at my childhood and even young adult, I know in those moments I would want to do those big grandiose things. But when I look back now and reflect, which I'm not even that old, but I remember mundane, these ordinary experiences of just chatting with a friend, playing roller hockey and burning my wheels out so much And these moments really speak to me, which I think would fall into your ordinary categories. I wonder if those people who are the younger generation or the younger population saying that they prefer these extraordinary experiences, I wonder if they were surveyed 20 years after what they would think is more enduring memories, but we don't have that data.
Yeah. I mean, we could easily collect that data, right? It's like, irrespective of your age, what is your
Mm.
happiest memory
Hmm.
from your early life, like when they were still in that younger bucket?
Yeah.
And I agree with you that the experiences that are likely to show up in our memories are very likely to be quite ordinary.
Hmm. I know when I was into time management, I thought I had to schedule everything, and I was the most efficient person I thought. But this conversation is reminding me how like the unfolding of life was happening around me, and these happiness moments were just. But I was getting those checklists done. I was like, I did it, I did it, I did it.
Yeah.
But I'm really hearing that it's the presence of that intentional usage of our time is perhaps the key to the happiness.
Yeah, and I will say that those tasks, those checklist items do need to show up in your week. And that's where that sort of scheduling, optimizing your week as a whole, like, it's not like forget all your tasks and, not do any of them. It is being like thoughtful about when those happen and when you will spend the time on them, but not let everything else sort of rush by and pass by, because these little moments are as important, if not more so, in creating this space and the time for them, so that you might indeed pause and smell the
Mhm.
roses, so that you make the time for the coffee date, so that you look at your daughter's beautiful little
Yeah.
picture. It only takes seconds, but those are the parts of our time in those moments that really sort of play out and have a really big effect on how we feel about our weeks, how we feel about our years, and how we feel about our life overall.
Well, speaking of time and ending, I know your time is precious, and so are the listeners. This conversation really made me think a lot about my time, and um, you bring up the picture about my daughter, and this mosaic view, I just have to say, really helped me. Even this idea of walking my kids to school. I walked them to school every day, and I often feel rushed. And I'm like, okay, I got to walk my kids to school. Good dads do that. And I was just doing it, you know? And then I started slowing down, and I had interviewed someone who wrote a book on awe. And he talked about how beautiful some things are, like a tree. And I was telling my daughter, I'm like, isn't it amazing? This tree grows all year for like 2.5 months in Canada where I live. And then it just dies. And then it hibernates in the winter and grows back again. And she's like, yeah, how does it do that? I'm like, I don't know, but it's pretty
But
amazing.
it's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was like maybe 16 seconds this time. So when you had said there's so much happiness available around us, it made me think of these moments. So thank you for that.
Yeah. And I would even say, yes, noticing the tree as you're taking your daughter to school, but even those times of the taking your daughter, like, that activity is such a treat.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, and even if framing it, it's like, oh my gosh, this is our morning, whether it's a ritual or this, that is a treat in itself as an activity, not something to move through to check off your list, but in itself is its own wonderful use of time. Also, really has a big effect on how you experience that time.
Okay, so my final question is, let's imagine you're at end of life around these conversations about endings. It doesn't matter how old you are, but life is coming to end, and you're sitting on a front porch looking out at a view that brings you complete peace, ease, and contentment. And you decide to write one last letter to your children's children on what you learned was important to live a meaningful life. What would be in that letter?
It would be that from that perspective, taking a broader view of my years, of recognizing that it was those little moments, those ordinary moments along the way, that are showing up in that perspective of having lived a happy life. So don't miss out on noticing those good things that are right there.
Well, thank you for that. And thank you for this conversation. I really appreciate it. For listeners, where can they find you and where can they get copies of your book?
So my book, Happier Hour, is available, I don't know, Amazon,
Everywhere.
wherever one buys books. And then my website, CassieMHolmes.com, sort of compiles a lot of my research and where I am. And so that is another place to find me.
We'll include all that in the show notes. And Cassie, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. This was really fun.
Thanks for watching this week's episode. If you enjoyed the chat, please like the video and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We'll see you next time.